Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today, we're diving deep into the world of Stoicism with Epictetus's Discourses. You know, for someone who was born into slavery, his thoughts on freedom are surprisingly relevant even today.
Yeah, it's what's fascinating about the discourses is that they weren't originally intended to be a book. They're more like lecture notes carefully compiled by Epictetus's student Arrian. They offer an intimate glimpse into his practical, down-to-earth approach to philosophy.
So we're getting a front row seat to the Stoic classroom centuries later. What are some of the big takeaways from the entire collection? What makes Epictetus's version of Stoicism stand out?
Well, you'll notice right away that Epictetus constantly emphasizes living in accordance with nature. He believed that the universe is governed by a divine reason, and our happiness hinges on aligning our lives with that reason.
That sounds pretty profound. Does he give us any hints about how to actually do that?
He absolutely does. One of the key threads running through all four books is the idea of focusing on what we can control: our thoughts, our judgments, our actions, and accepting what we can't. He constantly reminds us that external events like death, illness, or even other people's opinions are ultimately outside of our control.
So it's about mastering our inner world rather than trying to manipulate the outer world. I can see how that could be empowering, but also a bit challenging to put into practice.
It definitely takes practice, and Epictetus gives us tons of practical advice on how to cultivate this inner strength. He encourages us to examine our impressions carefully, to distinguish between what's truly important and what's just superficial.
So step one, stop sweating the small stuff. I like it. What else does he focus on?
Well, he also emphasizes the importance of virtue. He sees traits like courage, justice, and self-control as essential for living a good life. And for Epictetus, virtue isn't just something you talk about. It's something you actively practice day in and day out.
It's like building a muscle, that mental and moral strength. It takes consistent effort.
Precisely. And the discourses are filled with techniques for building that resilience. Now, since we're talking about the whole collection, let's take a journey through the four books, starting with Book 1. What's interesting here is that Epictetus kicks things off by diving straight into the heart of Stoicism, this idea of focusing on what's within our control.
So he doesn't waste any time with introductions or theoretical debates. He gets right to the practical stuff.
Exactly. He uses vivid analogies and examples to drive his points home. You might be familiar with the famous passage where he talks about the archer. The archer, he says, can control aiming the arrow and shooting it skillfully, but ultimately whether or not the arrow hits the target is up to factors outside of his control.
That's a great way to illustrate the point. So it's not about being passive or giving up. It's about focusing our energy on what we can actually influence.
You got it. And in Book 1, he also talks about dealing with difficult people, which I think we can all relate to. He reminds us that we can't control how others behave, but we can choose how we react to them.
I have a feeling we're going to come back to that theme again and again.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've laid the foundation with Book 1. What about Book 2? How does that build on these ideas?
Book 2 delves deeper into the nature of good and evil. Epictetus argues that true good and evil lie in our own choices and judgments, not in external events. He famously says, "It is not things that trouble us, but our opinions of things."
It's a quote you see popping up everywhere. So simple, yet so profound.
Right. And this book really challenges us to examine our beliefs and values. He urges us to question our assumptions about what's truly important in life.
Okay, so Book 2 is all about getting clear on our values and understanding that happiness comes from within. What about Book 3? Where does that take us?
Book 3 focuses specifically on applying Stoic principles to our interactions with others. Epictetus provides guidance on how to deal with criticism, how to manage our expectations of others, and how to maintain our inner peace, even when surrounded by chaos.
It's like the Stoic Guide to Relationships. Sign me up. What are some of the highlights of Book 3?
One of the most striking passages is where he talks about how we should approach our relationships like actors in a play. We should play our roles to the best of our ability, but we shouldn't get attached to the outcome.
Because ultimately, we're not in control of the whole script.
Exactly. He also emphasizes the importance of treating everyone with respect, even those who treat us badly. He reminds us that everyone is acting according to their own understanding of good and evil, even if that understanding is flawed.
That's a tough one. But I can see how it would lead to a more peaceful existence.
Okay.
Last but not least, Book 4. What's the grand finale of the Discourses?
Book 4 is like a culmination of all the previous books, bringing together all the key themes into a powerful synthesis. It focuses on the importance of living in accordance with nature, cultivating virtue, and finding true freedom through self-mastery.
So it's about integrating all these principles into a coherent way of life. I'm intrigued. What are some of the key takeaways from Book 4?
Well, he continues to stress the importance of aligning our will with the divine will. He also provides more specific guidance on how to cultivate virtues like courage, justice, and self-control.
So it's not just about understanding these concepts intellectually, but about embodying them in our daily lives.
Exactly. And Book 4 also contains some of Epictetus's most memorable passages on facing death with courage and accepting our fate with equanimity. He encourages us to remember that death is a natural part of life and that we shouldn't fear it.
Wow, that's a powerful message to leave us with.
Yeah.
I'm starting to get a sense of the depth and richness of Epictetus's philosophy. I think we've covered a lot of ground in this overview of the Discourses.
We have, but we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to unpack in these 4 books.
And that's exactly what we're going to do. Join us in part 2 as we delve deeper into Epictetus's powerful ideas and explore how they can help us navigate the challenges of modern life with wisdom and resilience.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Discourses. In part 1, we laid out the core themes of Epictetus's philosophy, like aligning with nature and mastering our inner world. Now let's zoom in on Book 1 and explore how he introduces these ideas.
I'm ready to unpack some wisdom. We talked about how Epictetus gets straight to the point, starting with the idea of focusing on what's within our control. How does he hammer that home in Book 1?
One of the first things he does is challenge our assumptions about what truly belongs to us. You might think you own your possessions, your body, even your reputation, but Epictetus argues that only our will and our judgments are truly within our power.
So that fancy car, the impressive job title. Those are all externals subject to change. What we think about them, how we react to them. That's where our true power lies.
Exactly. He uses the example of a banquet. You might be invited to a lavish feast, surrounded by delicious food and fine wine. But if you become fixated on those things, if you let your happiness depend on them, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. What if the food isn't to your liking? What if you spill wine on your clothes?
Suddenly the banquet isn't so enjoyable anymore. I can see how clinging to those external things makes us vulnerable to suffering.
Exactly. Epictetus would say, enjoy the banquet by all means. But remember, your true enjoyment comes from your own choices, your own inner state, not from the quality of the food or the grandeur of the setting.
This is starting to sound like a recipe for contentment. Not just for a banquet, but for life in general.
Precisely. And that's what's so brilliant about Epictetus. He takes these seemingly abstract philosophical ideas and makes them relevant to everyday life.
Speaking of everyday life, I'm curious about his advice on dealing with other people. Book 1 touches on that, right? We all have to navigate those tricky social situations.
He certainly does. And this is where his teachings on managing our expectations come into play. You might encounter someone who's rude, unfair, even downright cruel. But Epictetus would say, don't waste your energy getting angry or trying to change them. Remember, their actions are a reflection of their own inner state, not yours.
So it's about taking responsibility for our own reactions, even if someone else is clearly in the wrong.
Exactly. He uses the analogy of a traveler encountering a muddy road. You wouldn't get angry at the mud, would you? You'd simply adjust your course and keep moving forward.
I love that analogy. It's such a simple but powerful reminder that we can't control the mud in life, but we can control how we respond to it.
And this ties into another key point in Book 1, recognizing the difference between what is up to us and what is not. We can't control the weather, the traffic, or the opinions of others, but we can control our own thoughts, our own judgments, and our own actions.
There's a constant process of discernment, asking ourselves, is this within my sphere of influence? Can I do something about it? Or do I need to simply accept it?
You got it. And this discerning mindset is a key to cultivating inner peace and freedom.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in Book 1, mastering our perceptions, managing expectations, discerning what we can and cannot control. That's a pretty solid foundation for Stoic living. Where does Epictetus take us in Book 2?
Book 2 builds upon these themes, delving deeper into the nature of good and evil, and challenging us to examine our judgments even more closely. Epictetus pushes us to consider, are we truly judging things accurately, or are we letting our emotions and preconceived notions cloud our perceptions?
That's a great point. We might think we're being objective, but often our judgments are based on unconscious biases or unexamined beliefs.
Exactly, and this is where Epictetus's emphasis on self-knowledge becomes crucial. He encourages us to become keen observers of our own minds, to pay attention to our reactions and impulses, and to understand the underlying reasons for our judgments.
It sounds like he's advocating for a kind of mindfulness practice, long before mindfulness became a buzzword.
You're absolutely right. He even suggests we practice mental exercises, like deliberately exposing ourselves to situations that trigger our negative emotions, in order to train ourselves to respond with greater calmness and rationality.
So instead of avoiding what makes us uncomfortable, we should lean into it, in a controlled way, of course.
Precisely. He even uses the analogy of wrestling. If you want to become a skilled wrestler, you have to spar with opponents who challenge you, who push you beyond your comfort zone.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. We cultivate virtue through practice, through facing those internal and external challenges that force us to grow.
That's a great insight, and this practice of virtue is central to Book 2. Epictetus emphasizes that true happiness doesn't come from acquiring external things, but from developing those inner qualities that make us resilient, wise, and just.
So Book 2 is all about inner work, about refining our judgments, and cultivating those Stoic virtues.
It is, and he constantly reminds us that this inner work is an ongoing process. There's no finish line. It's about continually striving to align our lives with nature, with that divine reason that governs the universe.
This is getting really deep. I'm curious how this plays out in our interactions with others. Does Book 3 offer any practical advice on navigating those complex social dynamics?
Absolutely. In Book 3, Epictetus shifts the focus to the social realm, providing guidance on how to live in harmony with others while maintaining our own inner peace. He emphasizes the importance of understanding our roles and responsibilities within society.
So it's about being a good citizen, a good neighbor, a good friend, while staying true to ourselves and our Stoic principles.
You got it. And he offers some really interesting insights into the nature of relationships. For example, he reminds us that every relationship has its own set of unwritten rules and expectations. We should strive to understand these rules, not because we're obligated to conform to them, but because it helps us navigate social situations more effectively.
Welcome back to our final deep dive into Epictetus's Discourses. We've journeyed through the first 3 books, uncovering his insights on mastering our perceptions, cultivating virtue, and navigating those complex relationships. Now let's explore that grand finale, Book 4.
Yeah, Book 4 is really where Epictetus brings all these threads together, offering a powerful vision of what it means to live a truly Stoic life. He delves deeper into the nature of freedom, reminding us that true freedom isn't about external circumstances, but about aligning our will with the divine will.
That concept of aligning with the divine will has come up before. Can you elaborate on what that means for Epictetus and how it relates to finding true freedom?
So for Epictetus, the divine will represents that rational order of the universe, the underlying logic that governs everything, from the movement of the stars to the growth of a blade of grass. To align with this will means accepting what happens, recognizing that everything unfolds according to a larger plan.
So it's about surrendering to the flow of life, trusting that even the things that seem bad or unfair are part of a larger cosmic tapestry.
Exactly. And this surrender isn't about passivity or resignation. It's about recognizing that our struggles, our challenges, even our perceived failures, are all opportunities for growth and learning.
That's a powerful reframing. It shifts the focus from resisting what we can't control to embracing the journey, even the messy parts.
Precisely. And this acceptance, this alignment with the divine will, is ultimately what leads to true freedom. Because when we let go of our need to control everything, when we surrender to the flow of life, we liberate ourselves from the tyranny of our own desires and anxieties.
That makes a lot of sense. We've talked about how Epictetus emphasizes virtue throughout the Discourses. How does that theme come to life in Book 4?
Well, Book 4 is filled with practical advice on cultivating virtue, particularly courage, justice, and self-control. He reminds us that these virtues aren't just lofty ideals. They're skills that we can develop through practice and habit.
So it's like going to the gym for our character, building up our moral strength through consistent effort.
That's a great analogy. And just like physical exercise, practicing virtue can be challenging at times. It requires us to push beyond our comfort zones, to face our fears, and to resist temptations that lead us astray from our values.
And speaking of facing fears, Book 4 also touches on the topic of death, right? How does Epictetus encourage us to approach this inevitable aspect of life?
He acknowledges that the fear of death is natural, but he argues that it stems from a misunderstanding of our true nature. We tend to identify with our physical bodies, with our possessions, with our social roles. But for Epictetus, our true selves are something more enduring, something that transcends the limitations of our physical existence.
So it's about recognizing that we are more than just our bodies, more than just our stories, more than just our roles in this world.
Exactly. And this understanding can help us face death with greater equanimity. Because if we're not solely defined by our physical forms or our earthly experiences, then death becomes less of an ending and more of a transition.
That's a comforting thought. Takes some of the sting out of the inevitable.
He does. And Epictetus goes even further, suggesting that we practice contemplating our own mortality, not in a morbid way, but as a way to appreciate the preciousness of life and to motivate us to live each day to the fullest.
That's a powerful practice. It reminds me of the Stoic idea of memento mori, remembering that we are mortal.
You got it. And this remembrance isn't meant to be depressing. It's meant to be liberating. It frees us from the trivial concerns that often consume us, reminding us that what truly matters is living a virtuous life in alignment with nature and the divine will.
It's a powerful message to end on. We've covered a lot of ground in our journey through the Discourses. Is there a particular passage or idea from Book 4 that you find especially resonant?
One passage that always stands out to me is where Epictetus talks about the importance of focusing on what is truly our own. He reminds us that our thoughts, our judgments, our intentions are the only things we truly possess. Everything else, wealth, status, even our bodies, is ultimately impermanent and outside of our control.
That's a great reminder to let go of those external attachments and to focus on cultivating inner strength and virtue. Any final thoughts for our listeners as we wrap up this deep dive into Epictetus?
I would encourage everyone to read the Discourses for themselves. Epictetus's words have a way of cutting through the noise and clutter of life, offering a timeless path to freedom, wisdom, and inner peace.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. This has been an incredibly enriching journey through the Stoic world of Epictetus. And to our listeners, remember the power to live a good life lies within you. Embrace the present moment, cultivate virtue, and strive to align your will with the divine will. Until next time, take care.